Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition's press briefing on deep sea mining. My name is Trav Zayton, and I am the Communications Campaign Manager at the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, and I will be your moderator for today. And so thank you so much for joining. Please note that we are recording this session today, and so we will be able to circulate this recording with participants afterwards as well. So for the briefing today, we're going to dive into the global resistance globally to deep sea mining and explore why this destructive industry is not needed, not wanted, and not worth the risk, and bring you all up to speed on what to expect at the upcoming International Seabed Authorities Council meeting, where world governments will convene in Kingston, Jamaica from October 30th to November 8th to negotiate a mining code that, if agreed and adopted, would open up our ocean to the largest mining operation humanity has ever seen. And so the DSCC and our partner and member orgs will be present in Kingston throughout the International Seabed Authorities Council meeting next week, urging governments to draw a line in the sand and support a moratorium on this destructive and emerging industry. And so for the briefing today, we have lined up 5 amazing panelists, and they include Sophia Sinikli, the Global Deep Sea Mining Campaign Lead with the DSCC, Emma Wilson, Policy Officer with the DSCC, Alana Smith, Director of the Ipukarea Society based in the Cook Islands, Jessica Battle, Lead for the No Deep Sea Mining Campaign at WWF, and Joe Debush, Legal Officer at the Ocean Foundation, focusing on deep sea mining. So after we complete our panelists, the speakers, we will then open up for questions, and we made sure we have plenty of time to answer your questions. And so if any do arise during the presentations, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will get to them once we get to that portion of the briefing today. So just to jump right on in, I will hand it over to Sophia to kick us off. And Sophia will provide an overview of the current state of play towards a moratorium for deep sea mining and the bubbling resistance across a broad spectrum of society. So over to you, Sophia.
Thanks, Travis. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Okay, there we go. So welcome from me as well to this briefing on the deep sea mining moratorium campaign and the upcoming International Seabed Authority meeting, the council meeting that is coming up next week. I'm Sophia Sinikli. I'm the head of the campaign for the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. We are a global coalition with over 100 members worldwide. We work together for the protection of the deep sea and the establishment of a moratorium on deep sea mining at the International Seabed Authority. So I will give you an overview on the current state of play of the campaign. I'm going to focus more specifically on sort of the developments of the past few months. The first thing to note is that the opposition, the concern, the questions around deep sea mining really continues to grow. Deep sea mining is one of the key environmental issues of our time. And this is because the deep sea is amongst the last pristine areas of our planet. We know very little about the deep sea, about the species and the ecosystems that exist in these depths. And scientists are just starting to discover the wonders of the deep, introducing us to new species. For example, 90% of the species in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, the area that's sort of first up to be mined, are not described by science yet. So that's quite a shocking percentage. On the other hand, we know that the impacts of deep sea mining are going to be permanent. They will be irreversible in human timeframes, and they would cause biodiversity loss, habitat destruction, extinction of species before we even know them, and it would add another large-scale, heavy extractive industry on an already depleted ocean. We do know that there's no room for more damage. We are not in balance with nature, and deep sea mining risks pushing us over the edge. So it's really exciting to see the opposition constantly building from all sides of society and the economy. In the past months alone, we had more and more announcements, one after another, from scientists, from companies, indigenous leaders and groups, citizens across the world raising their voices, saying no to deep sea mining. Here in July, since July, we had, for example, Canada come out with a stronger position than before, calling for a moratorium. We had Brazil call for at least 10 years of a pause. And just last week, Monaco, Prince Albert II came out with a strong statement saying we cannot accept deep sea mining. So just from July last year, we have 22 countries coming out with a precautionary pause, a moratorium, or ban position. Let's see how we do this. Okay. In July as well, the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner came out with a statement. It's quite a strong statement calling for a moratorium. The statement said deep sea mineral extraction should not proceed without the adequate measures to protect the ability of future generations to enjoy their human rights. Also, that states have the duty to preserve the ability of future generations to fully enjoy human rights, including the right to clean, healthy and sustainable environment. A really strong statement coming out on deep sea mining. 37 financial institutions as well, managing a budget of over 3.3 trillion euros, said for long-term investors, the ocean is worth more than just the value of its finite resources, and that significant challenges must be overcome before deep sea mining can be recognized as economically viable or as a responsible industry that can make a positive economic contribution to society. Really strong statement there as well. At the same time, indigenous leaders, communities are raising their voices against deep sea mining, demanding a free, prior and informed consent before any decisions are taken on this industry. Scientists, or more and more scientists are coming out. The latest report from the European Academy's Science Advisory Council called for a moratorium, and more companies as well. We have here the latest additions have joined the call saying no to deep sea mining. And our colleague Jessica will talk more about the corporate side of things. And of course, we have the global movement mobilizing everywhere around the world, in capitals, at sea, around global conferences, online, asking the governments to take a stand and say no to deep sea mining, establish a moratorium on this destructive industry at the ISA. Governments really have a choice in front of them. They can, for the first time, stop a crisis before it begins. Deep sea mining has no place in a sustainable future, especially as we are in the heart of the triple environmental crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. And deep sea mining will not only make it worse for us and future generations. So the way forward is a moratorium established at the ISA, and we call on all governments to take a stand and listen to the calls of their citizens and the concerns of all sides of society through that. So thanks for me, and back to you, Travis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sophia, for that wonderful presentation, just to highlight, the growing momentum globally, really across a broad spectrum of society and actors, and emphasizing that we do not want this industry to proceed. So now we're going to turn to Emma Wilson, who is going to dive into the outcomes from the previous International Seabed Authority meeting, what to expect at the upcoming meeting, the council meeting next week, and the growing concerns surrounding the rush to complete a mining code in the face of massive scientific gaps in understanding, and also some severe and reoccurring inadequacies with the UN affiliate body, the ISA, who is obliged to act for the benefit of humankind. So over to you, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. So I think before we look ahead to the upcoming meeting, we'll just take a look back at what happened in the previous meeting of the ISA, which took place in July of this year. So as I'm sure many of you know, back in 2021, a 2-year countdown was triggered under what is referred to as the 2-year rule. Now, this legal loophole placed a deadline on the adoption of a mining code. that deadline was the 9th of July of this year. The day came and went, and the mining code was not adopted. Now, this was actually a big deal because it essentially indicates unanimous political recognition of the environmental risk that Sophia was describing earlier, and the vast remaining gaps in the regulations, and also in scientific understanding of the deep sea and the impacts of deep sea mining. However, the 2-year loophole does still remain open, meaning that still now any contractor could apply for an exploitation contract, even
Seem to have lost Emma. Internet connectivity problems. Let's just give it another second. Let's see if Emma comes back. No. Okay, so we're gonna jump to our next speaker real quick, and then we will come back, and hopefully Emma's internet connectivity is going better. So let me just move on. So now we have a video recording actually for our next presentation from Alana Smith, who is based in the Cook Islands in the Pacific and is on the front lines against deep sea mining. Oh, I think I see Emma is back. Let's see. Hi, Emma. You're back.
I'm back. I'm so sorry, everyone.
No
I
worries at
will
all.
pick up.
Yeah, please pick up for where you were. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So back to the recap of what happened in July of this year. So the ISA Council also agreed to a timeline for negotiations with a view to finalising and adopting a mining code by 2025. The other thing that happened, as Sophia outlined earlier, is that a wave of new countries joined the call for a moratorium or a pause on deep sea mining. And for the first time at the ISA Assembly meeting, there was an attempt to table a proposal for a precautionary pause on deep sea mining. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back to the present day now. We are about to go into the first meeting of the ISA Council since all of these events. And we now have this kind of tug of war situation with, on the one hand, this ever-growing group that is calling to slow down the process via a moratorium. And on the other hand, a minority of other countries and the ISA Secretariat that are pushing to accelerate towards adopting a mining code in 2025. Just to be very clear, the adoption of the mining code is not the solution to the 2-year loophole. It would simply precipitate the start of deep sea mining. This is because the structure and function of the ISA is unfortunately weighted in favor of granting contracts as soon as those regulations are in place. Now, this kind of inherent bias in the structure stems from a conflict of interest that really sits at the heart of the ISA, in that the aim is for the ISA ultimately to be financed by royalties from mining contracts. So that means that the very existence of this institution relies on mining activities beginning. However, it's really important to note that this sits alongside the ISA's obligation to protect the marine environment, because that is within the ISA's mandate. But the reality is that deep sea mining, as it is proposed today, is an inherently damaging activity. So it's essentially impossible for the ISA to fulfill this obligation, hence the momentum for a moratorium on deep sea mining. So this kind of sustained attempt to fast track the process is A, out of step with the growing resistance to deep sea mining, B, is not conducive to responsible, informed decision making, and C, it is not inclusive of the full global community. For many member states and observers, the volume of work is huge, and having to travel to Jamaica 3 times a year is expensive. In fact, it's actually prohibitively expensive for many countries and stakeholders, particularly from the global south. So we have this situation where the ISA Council, a minority group of only 36 states, is negotiating conditions for potentially the largest extractive industry in the history of humanity. But most ISA member states and other interested parties are not even able to be in the room. And those that are present often do not actually have the capacity to do the necessary groundwork to actually show up with a considered position 3 times a year. So many states are actually not able to have their voices heard in this debate. And it's really important to note that silence does not mean consent. To finish, I'd just like to stress that this drive to start deep sea mining fundamentally conflicts with the physical, chemical, and biological realities of a world facing a triple planetary crisis. So rather than engaging in this frenzied attempt to adopt regulations by 2025, we would like to see states pushing the brakes on the whole thing and establishing a moratorium on deep sea mining instead. It's really the only rational response to this situation. Thank you very much, and looking forward to your questions later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emma. And so as we noted, we will take questions at the end, and if they do pop up now, please do post them in the Q&A, and we will circle back to them for sure. And so next we have a video recording from Alana Smith, as I was saying, who is based in the Cook Islands in the Pacific, who is on the front lines against deep sea mining, as they are adjacent to where the first mining operations, if permitted to proceed, will begin. And also, as the Cook Islands, with the aid of 3 deep sea mining companies, has begun exploratory mining within their national waters already. Alana, in her video, will provide an overview of how DSM, or deep sea mining, could impact her island nation, how Pacific peoples are connected to the deep sea, and as the director of the Ipukarea Society, a Cook Islands NGO, on how they've been addressing deep sea mining within their own country and key concerns they have with the process, and how their government has allowed such an industry to get the green light within their waters. So just bear with me while I get the video up. Go. I believe you should all be able to see the video.
Kia ora tātou. My name is Alana Smith from the Cook Islands, representing the Ipukarea Society. Apologies from myself in not being able to attend today's press briefing due to time zones and currently being on sporting commitments playing netball in Singapore. My questions for today: what are the environmental and climate risks of deep sea mining? Well, there are still so many uncertainties when it comes to the environmental impacts of deep sea mining. There are many unknowns when it comes to understanding how the deep sea ecosystem functions, its role in the ocean, regulating our globe's temperature, and how it sustains the life it holds. Our low-lying islands are most at risk when it comes to sea level rise, and of course with more intense storms being created by climate change as well. We are very concerned that disturbing the seafloor, which is our largest carbon sink in the world, could actually increase the impacts of climate change rather than being the solution. These uncertainties need more time to be researched and investigated, preferably by independent researchers, and not only by the mining companies. Coming from the Pacific people see our ocean as a life source. We have relied on our ocean for centuries as part of our subsistence living, and now today for commercial opportunities. With tuna being a staple resource for many Pacific Islanders, new research has found that deep sea mining has the potential to cause significant damage to this fishery. We have no idea of how the deep sea biodiversity associated with the nodule fields is connected up through the water column to the resource we rely on, being tuna. Second question on cultural and spiritual connections to the deep sea. The Indigenous people of the Cook Islands have similar cultural and spiritual connections to the deep sea as many of our Pacific neighbours, and we share many stories of creation. For example, it has been told and passed on through generations that the mud found at the very bottom of the seafloor is where life first began. It is from this mud that our first gods came to be, like Tangaroa, god of the sea. And from Tangaroa, then came his offspring, and the coral, then plants, and eventually mankind. These deep sea cultural connections are important to Polynesians because that's part of our identity, where we came from and how we came to be today. These cultural connections to the deep, to my understanding, are only just being heard at the discussions this year at the ISA meetings. A key discussion point that has been missing from the table for all these years, and one that I believe should be properly considered, given the majority of the minerals targeted for extraction will come from the Pacific. Deep sea mining within the Cook Islands. Some may not know, but the Cook Islands have vast amounts of these nodules, polymetallic nodules, within our EEZ, and we've known this since the 1970s. The Cook Islands passed its first Seabed Minerals Act in 2009. A new act was prepared in 2019, and this has been amended twice, that being in 2020 and 2021. The Cook Islands government has interest in polymetallic nodules both within the Cook Islands EEZ and in international waters. And in both cases, this is through a joint venture company of the Cook Islands government and Belgium company GSR. In 2021, a 5-year exploration phase commenced, and 3 mining companies were approved an exploration license. These companies are CIC Ocean Research, who have ties to Odyssey Marine Exploration, Moana Minerals, a subsidiary of US company Ocean Minerals, and the joint venture company with the Cook Islands government, Cobalt Seabed Resources. Prior to the start of the 5-year exploration phase, government consultations were made across the country. From an NGO's perspective, we felt that there was an imbalance in the messaging being presented to our communities, as there was a real emphasis on the financial benefits associated with deep sea mining industry, and little attention on the environmental risks involved. It was interesting to note that our national newspaper did a poll on whether people supported seabed mining or not, and the results came back with a 50-50 split decision. These results could suggest that the government has done a good job of persuading the population that seabed mining is a relatively risk-free activity for the country. We maintain that not enough information has been made available on the risks for our people to make an informed decision. They are told of the potential financial gains to be made for our economy to improve our health, education, and infrastructure, to build resilience against the likes of sea level rise. However, for us, the potential financial gains are still unclear. How will any wealth be distributed? We feel it will be the companies and the middlemen benefiting much more than the general population. Today, with the Cook Islands being in its 2nd year of exploration, the Ipukarea Society is concerned that the data being collected to inform management decisions are only being collected by the 3 mining companies. We hope that independent research can also be carried out in our waters to inform management decisions. Our society will also continue to work with community groups, presenting on the associated environmental impacts and potential risks involved so that our people are made aware and informed of both the pros and cons of such a new industry. Kia orana e kia manuia.
Oh, so hope that was a great and informative video from Alana. There is, someone that's been on the front lines, fighting against DSM in her own country. So up next, we're going to move to Jessica Battle with WWF to bust the myths in greenwashing of mining companies who are saying that we need these minerals to fuel green transition when experts, reports, businesses, financial institutions, companies, battery manufacturers, and many others are saying that we don't need them, that alternatives are available and already coming to markets, and that in fact a moratorium is required instead. So over to you, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Travis, and the DSCC for having WWF on this briefing as well. And thank you to those of you listening in. So the need for these minerals is being sort of pegged for the so-called green transition, the transition into a carbon-free society, which of course we all urgently need to see. However, that these minerals are needed for the solutions to go carbon-free is not true. It is not possible for the sort of time frame we're looking at for the green transition. We need the green transition to happen urgently, and deep sea mining is far too nascent, far too early in its development to actually meet this demand. But in particular, there are many other pathways rather than opening up new frontiers to destructive extractive industries, whether on land or in the sea. WWF commissioned a report through a research agency in Norway called SINTEF, which is a technical research institute, to look into what are the scenarios for these minerals that are being looked at from the deep sea, looking at 7 critical raw minerals that can be extracted from the deep sea, but are also, of course, found on land. And in this report, we asked the research agency to look into many kinds of alternatives, both alternatives that we can apply right now and what are in the pipeline, because we live in a very dynamic society where research is going very, very fast, and where the policy decisions often are kind of falling behind where the research is, and policymakers do not often have to hand the latest know-how and research and even pipeline products when they are deciding about important issues such as shall we go mining for these minerals. We wanted to provide some of those findings and other pathways towards the green transition. And this report, I just want to go through a few of the key findings, states that the demand of these 7 critical raw minerals can be reduced by 58% from now to 2050. This needs effort, but so would seabed mining, of course. About new technologies that are already in the pipeline and new technologies that are really just at the sort of research state, together can reduce the demand for these 7 minerals by 30% taken together. For cobalt, nickel, and manganese, which are some of the ones that are being touted for batteries, for example, 40 to 50% of the demand that is being seen can be reduced by new technologies alone, and 20% of so-called rare earth elements. And in addition to reducing by technological choices, can also reduce the demand for these raw materials further by applying circular economy strategies. So here we're talking about policy decisions, both in government circles, in government administrations, etc., but also, of course, businesses. Between now, or 2022, when the report came out, and 2030, circular economy strategies can reduce this demand by 18%. And in addition to that, 20% of the total mineral demand can be supplied by recycling between 2022 and 2050. And as much as more technological innovations and new technologies come in and substitution with new minerals, so then we'll see a total reduction of these minerals by 2050 by 58%. And the idea that we would then need deep sea mining is really, it really goes away. There is, though, importantly, a need for some new minerals until the circular economy is being implemented. These minerals can be sourced from responsible extraction of tailings, so these are residues from old mines, and from urban mining, which is mining the waste. I read the other day that the mineral waste from all the toys that are found around the world is an enormous source. For example, the mobile phones, everything we have these minerals in already. They have a limited life cycle. These can be remined, and these minerals can be recuperated. Only last week, a Swedish research group in Gothenburg came up with a new low-impact solution for recycling the minerals in car batteries with a much less corrosive and environmentally impactful process than what has been looked at before. So solutions are coming all the time, and so as WWF, we really see that this argument that are promoted by industry is just, another old way of kind of continuing to point to a linear extractive industry. We've been, subject to that from the petrol, oil, and gas industry for the last decades. We're now hearing the same arguments from the deep sea miners. But importantly, the mining that is needed until we go circular has to be done responsibly. That is not the case today. So here, regulators and businesses have a very strong role to play in making sure that the mining that is needed until the circular economy is fully realized is done responsibly, and with, of course, the free, prior, and informed consent from indigenous peoples and the needs of local communities, that many of them today also are relying on jobs from the mining sector in many countries. I think I'll just stop there and perhaps take some questions. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessica. Yeah, so we've really gotten, and we saw that, deep sea bed mining is not wanted, and really getting into this past presentation of why deep sea bed mining is not needed and the alternatives that are available. So thank you so much, Jessica. And as I say before, we will take all questions at the end from the panelists. And so if you do have any, please put them in the Q&A and we will address them. Thank you so much. Moving to our last speaker for today is Bobby Joe Debush with the Ocean Foundation. And Bobby Joe will highlight findings from the recent report on the financial unviability of deep sea mining, the regulatory uncertainty, and who will actually benefit from such an industry. And so over to you, Bobby Joe.
Thank you, Travis. So I want to talk a little bit about why seabed mining is not an ESG or sustainable investment, and why it's not a good investment, even for those who aren't prioritizing people or planet in their investment strategies. First, the numbers just don't add up. Optimistic financial models underestimate technical challenges associated with seabed mining. The cost of retrieving metals from the bottom of the seafloor for the first time at industrial scale is likely significantly underestimated due to technological difficulty. Seabed mining presents a novel and extraordinary physical challenge compounded by high pressure, low temperatures, and low light. Specific and expensive machines are required to operate in harsh conditions. Industrial extractive projects are highly capital intensive and notorious for how often and by how much they go over budget. Seabed mining would be an industrial endeavor never seen before, and tests to date have been riddled with problems, including a highly controversial spill. Most seabed mining companies are privately held or state-owned, and consequently their finances are not public. However, Canadian entity The Metals Company, TMC, is publicly held and trades on the US stock market. Because of this, the company is required to make regular public financial disclosures and thus serves as a useful industry case study. TMC has been accused of failing to adequately disclose effects of a changing market and market circumstances on its financial projections. In one example, interest rates have gone up significantly since TMC went public, skyrocketing the cost of borrowing money. That increased cost has not been accounted for in key financial calculations that are regularly shared with investors. The significant rise in interest rates, substantially underestimated actual operating and capital costs are making an impression on the market. On December 5th, 2022, TMC received a notice of delisting from the US stock market because it traded under $1 for more than 30 days. After recovering briefly, it again went under $1 for 30 days and got delisted in April, recovered briefly, and now TMC has again been trading under $1 since September 29th of this year. Second, seabed mining is championed by a set of corporate actors whose investment history does not inspire confidence. The metals company has been called out by civil society watchdogs for misleading statements to investors, and it was forced by the SEC, the US Securities Exchange Commission, to correct formal investor statements. There are 2 ongoing class action lawsuits against TMC alleging that their personnel made false or misleading statements or failed to disclose material information to investors. And there's another lawsuit that was filed just this year. The short seller, Bonitas Research, reported that TMC siphoned money to insiders by overpaying for a mining license that nobody wanted to buy. If this is true, it could raise liability for financial crimes, further endangering TMC's solvency and reputation. The SEC itself is currently investigating TMC for potential wrongdoing. The organizational chart for various prospective seabed mining companies, including TMC, Deep Green, Deep Sea Mining Finance, and Nautilus, is all overlapping. The funding behind these entities is also intertwined. A sanctioned Russian oligarch and an Omani business person who has been implicated in the 1MDB scandal are among the shareholders. Insiders have been found to be connected to the Panama Papers, money laundering, and insider trading. When Nautilus, a precursor to TMC, went bankrupt, it left the country of Papua New Guinea with a loss of about $120 million US. Third, positioning DSM as an ESG or sustainable investment exposes investors to greenwashing claims and liability. Seabed mining is unequivocally not sustainable. It's not an ESG investment. Regarding the environment, seabed mining is an extractive industry that will cause permanent damage to the Earth's largest ecosystem. As for the social aspect, as discussed, Indigenous people and local communities around the world are speaking out against seabed mining in an effort to protect their cultural heritage and ties to the ocean for current and future generations. Any project pursued would cause reputational risk to investors choosing to ignore the pleas of Indigenous communities across the globe. Regarding governance, the International Seabed Authority itself has come under scrutiny for a host of internal practices, from bullying to excessive spending, highlighted in multiple major media outlets. International Seabed Authority Secretary General Michael Lodge is reported to have given confidential business information, earmarked only for developing countries, directly to TMC. Globally, ESG claims are under increasing scrutiny, particularly in Europe and the US. Investors are increasingly concerned about regulatory investigation and shareholder litigation related to false claims of sustainability. Again, seabed mining is a scheme. It has the potential to destroy Earth's last wilderness and endanger our largest carbon sink, while proving itself neither technically nor financially feasible. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bobby Joe, for really, highlighting, the financial concerns with mining companies, and really, pointing to, we went through why deep seabed mining is not needed, not wanted, and closing it off with why it's not worth the risk either. So thank you so much. We have 20 minutes left, and so we're going to jump to the Q&A portion, and we have some great questions already in the chat, and so we will field them to folks, and if any do arise, please put them in the chat there. So, first one is to Emma, but then of course we can open up to other panelists that would like to answer. And so this comes from Claire. Specifically, what are the ecological and mitigation topics that will be covered at next week's meeting?
Yeah, thank you, Claire, for that question. So in next week's meeting, the council is essentially kind of continuing with business as usual, moving through negotiating the mining code, and the particular segment that they'll be focusing on is about pollution and waste management. In the pollution side of the conversation, there'll be some focus on noise impacts of deep sea mining. There was a very interesting report that came out last year that kind of raised the noise issue for the first time and pointed to the fact that the noise from deep sea mining has the potential to cover an area the size of Europe. Of course, noise is a type of pollution that's often overlooked in these kinds of conversations, but it has really severe impacts on marine ecosystems. And of course, if you think about what this operation looks like, it's really ranging from surface vessels, massive tubes going right to several kilometers down to the ocean floor, and then these mining vehicles on the ocean floor. And of course, we're not just talking about one mining vehicle, we're talking about potentially several hundred. So impacts from this whole apparatus will affect not only deep sea ecosystems, but will resonate throughout the water column, therefore having effects on some of those iconic species that we know and love, such as whales and turtles. Indeed, the mining zone that is currently targeted for mining actually sits right by a migratory route for whales, and noise, for example, is likely to be a key stressor for those species, affecting communication, navigation, feeding, and hunting. Otherwise, there'll also be discussion on disposal, dumping, and discharge of waste. So at the moment, essentially, these regulations basically permit the dumping of waste in the marine environment. And, in one of the central features of deep sea mining, as the operational practices stand today, is this discharge plume that comes from the surface vessel. So that plume is predicted to travel, well, by some estimations, to travel several thousand kilometers. So that, these impacts really do not remain within the mining sites alone. And once again, disrupt midwater ecosystems as well as deep sea ecosystems. So, all of this essentially points to the fact that we really need to stop using our ocean as a dumping ground. And unfortunately, deep sea mining is essentially a perpetuation of this problematic human behavior. And the regulations that are essentially allowing this kind of behavior are not part of the solution, they are part of the problem. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Emma. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? You gave a great answer, Emma. Thank you so much. Moving to our next question from Paul, who is a lawyer and concerned about whether any companies have acquired permits of any sort, and can they sue to proceed, and this can usually create huge barriers to stopping the process without paying off the companies. And so what Paul's wondering is, he was hoping for a summary of the permit process so we can know how to stop permits from being issued. And so who would like to take that one? I think Bobby Joe, we'll go to you to start, and then we can jump to others as well. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to start, Paul. It's a great question. And I'm happy for others to elaborate here, but I think right now at the International Seabed Authority, on the in the area beyond national jurisdiction, there have only been exploration permits, and the regimes for exploration and exploitation are quite different and quite separate, and we're still working up the regulations for exploitation. And while some countries have exploration permits, I think, and I'm happy to hear otherwise, I've heard little rumbling about there being an expectation that those will turn into exploitation permits. However, in national waters, I think this is more of a concern. Some of these mining outfits that have licenses to explore, for example, in islands in the Pacific, I think there's some talk about concern about at what point does an exploration license turn into a reasonable expectation of an exploitation license to commercially mine? What happens if countries decide not to grant those? Are they exposing themselves to lawsuits? So to directly answer your question, I think the permitting process is more advanced in some of the Pacific Island nations. And I would also just highlight the fact that Alana mentioned that Odyssey Marine Minerals is a large stakeholder or shareholder in one of the Cook Islands exploitation companies or mining companies, and Odyssey Marine is currently suing Mexico because Mexico granted exploration permits for a phosphate mine and then didn't, in the end, permit exploitation of that mine. It's a long, ongoing process. It's been going on for years, and Odyssey also has a history of, I believe Spain accused them of, retaliatory litigation or something of the sort. So I agree that is a problem, and it hasn't specifically, in this case, kind of reared its head, but I think it's something that countries are looking at.
Thank you, Bobby Joe. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe I can just elaborate a bit on what the permitting process looks like at the ISA, because that's quite an important question. So as Bobby Joe said, yeah, there are currently 30 exploration licenses for international waters at the ISA. And at the moment, there's one application that's kind of waiting in the wings coming from Nauru Ocean Resources, Inc., which is a subsidiary of the metals company. However, important to specify that there are 8 other exploration licenses that will expire in 2026. And one of the particularities of the ISA legislation around exploration licenses is that there's a use it or lose it clause, basically meaning that you have a choice. Either you transform your exploration license into an exploitation license, or you lose the claim. So there's a lot of pressure on these companies to actually make that shift. In terms of the actual process, it's problematic because it's sort of set up in this way where the voting structure is very much weighted in favor of granting contracts once an application is made. So there is an organ at the ISA that's called the Legal and Technical Commission. They receive the application first. If they make a positive recommendation for the application, and I should stress that they have never rejected an application for an exploration license, despite the fact that some of those licenses are in biologically sensitive areas. They've never rejected an application for an exploration license. So if they make a positive recommendation, then it goes to the council, and then the council can actually only reject this application by a 2/3 majority. 2/3 majority to reject the application. So that means that you have this situation where actually an application to exploit minerals in the deep sea can be granted by a very small minority of member states of the ISA. Stressing once again that this is the ISA Council that makes this decision. So that's only 36 countries out of the 168 member states of the ISA. And you only need 1/4 of, 1/3 of that group to vote in favor of granting the application. So it's really biased in favor of just handing those licenses out, which is one of the big concerns with the adoption of regulations, because the adoption of regulations basically paves the way for that to happen. I'll leave it there.
That was great, Emma. So one thing so a question that's popped as well that's kind of related to this and exploration permits and the mining companies themselves is someone mentioned mining tests that led to a spill, which is, I think, in relation to the TMC spill that occurred in November last year. Can you give us some more details about that? Who would like to take that?
I think I mentioned that, so I can start, and then pleased to have anybody finish. So the metals company was doing some testing in the CCZ in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. They left from both San Diego and Manzanillo, Mexico last fall, in fall 2022. And it was problematic to start with because it was approved over like a 3-day email vote silence procedure, meaning either say no during these 72 hours or you automatically approve. And that's something that's problematic in the structure of the ISA, which has also brought up a lot of ongoing procedural questions. A lot of council members didn't even know this was happening before it was underway and approved. There was a spill. I'll drop a link to some videos that that scientists from the boat shared, and I'll drop them in the chat off of a Greenpeace website that hosts them, which is great. And what's really problematic about this, things go wrong, right? Like that's why people have tests, but various things are problematic about this. One, it wasn't reported at all until the videos leaked. And then it was reported to the International Seabed Authority 16 days after it happened. I'll also drop a link in the chat. The report, the ISA, if you haven't picked up on this from what my colleagues have been saying, is really weighted toward mining happening. Despite this, even their report on this incident said TMC had done all of these things wrong in addressing the spill, reporting the spill, remediating, like turning off the spill. And then I'll say one more thing about this, which is that in Kingston, some sessions ago, maybe in March, there was questions asked by scientists to the scientists from TMC about the spill, and they wanted to know about how it affected the biology in the midwater column. And at first TMC said, oh, it didn't. And they said, well, how did you know? And they said, well, because we never tested for the biology, so we don't know what's there. So the results, we don't have any results on that, which is much different than it didn't have any effect. And again, it's not the fact that during a test something went wrong that's problematic. It's all of these things about transparency, about accountability, about enforcement that kind of overshadow this, that make it a highly problematic situation. And I'm sure others have maybe something to add.
No, I think that was a lovely, wonderful answer. Thank you so much, Bobby Joe. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. And so we'll take this one from Joan. And so a moratorium suggested in the future be a credible outcome under the law of the sea. And so I think Joan's question is a moratorium possible under the law of the sea, and why not? Why aren't we calling for a prohibition? And so I think I'm going to turn to Sophia to answer this one to kick us off, please. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Travis. I thank John for that great question. I think a moratorium is absolutely possible under UNCLOS, under the UN Law of the Sea. Actually, it's required by it because deep sea mining should not happen unless the protection of the marine environment is secure, which is an obligation in the heart of UNCLOS. So there are calls for straight out ban on deep sea mining amongst our members as well. And if you might have seen France's President Macron ask for prohibition last year at the UN Ocean Conference, later on at the UNFCCC COP as well. As a coalition of over 100 members, we have a moratorium position with clear conditions, such as that deep sea mining should not go ahead unless it can be proven that it will cause no harm to the marine environment, no biodiversity loss, that the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples is fulfilled, and that there is also social alliance to this industry starting. None of these conditions obviously is even close to being fulfilled. So deep sea mining is not needed, not wanted, and not worth the risk. The ISA needs to establish a moratorium as soon as possible. And you saw also from the graph that I shared in the presentation earlier that the number of states are using different terms like precautionary pause or moratorium, and that all in essentially drives a similar outcome in terms of stopping this industry now that the threat is so imminent. and allowing time for the scientific gaps obviously to be filled, but also real serious political conversations like the one that you raise as well, that there is space for those questions and what type of conditions would be put forward for a moratorium on this destructive industry.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sophia, for that answer. And so we'll take this one last question from the chat. What role does China play at ISA negotiations? Is it a key player? What's China's position on deep sea mining? Does opposition to deep sea mining exist in China? So I think I might just hand to Emma to kick us off of how of China and how they are at the ISA negotiations. Over to you, Emma.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the question. So, you know, I think it's important to start by noting that, you know, the ISA is a multilateral fora. So in that context, all countries have an equal vote and an equal voice, right? There's not any one country that's more important than another. China participates in the negotiations like other countries. They do hold 5 exploration licenses. That is the most exploration licenses of any country. And that's actually an interesting point that today, you know, there are 30 exploration licenses held by only 22 countries. So obviously that's a very, you know, they're all in the hands of a very small minority of countries, and 5 of them are with China. In terms of China's position, at the moment, their focus seems to be very much on process, and they're not really expressing kind of a very clear position on the sort of higher level ethical questions of should deep sea mining go ahead or not. They seem to be observing how things are playing out. However, the one thing that they stand really firm on is UNCLOS, the convention, the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, must be respected. So that's essentially kind of what we're seeing manifesting in China's position at the ISA right now. Sophia, you might have some things to add on that.
Yeah, just to emphasize what you said, Emma, earlier, that this is a multilateral process. Last July, China did put the brakes on the discussion on a general policy for the protection of marine environment at the ISA assembly, which was a very strong move by China. Quite surprised the room to take such a stand at that stage. However, China also said that they're, you know, interested to have a conversation to explore this subject a bit more and ask for more time to allow for that discussion. So it remains to be seen as well how China will, you know, position itself as a country in this debate. The debate is coming up again, right? The general policy for the protection of the marine environment that could set the conditions for how and when deep sea mining could start. Then that is going to come up again the next, you know, the next council meeting, essentially in the sidelines of the meeting, because it's not in the center of the council discussions, but it is an ongoing debate. So let's see how China positions itself, but also how the rest of the global community does, because this is a key part of this should be sort of central to how countries sort of put the environment as a priority in connection to the commitments that they have and the obligations that they have on other global agreements as well. Like, we're celebrating the signing of the BBNJ, the High Seas Treaty. Countries are like, it's a historical moment that countries came together and finalized a treaty for the protection of biodiversity. How can they at the same time be in a conversation about allowing deep sea mining when we know that would like really work completely against the objective of the High Seas Treaty? So those are big questions for states. And I think the next few months are going to be really critical for this issue.
I think we do have to close, though. Unfortunately, we are at the hour, but thank you so much. And so, yeah, I really just want to thank everyone for joining today. A big thank you for our panelists. We really hope that this briefing has been useful. One thing I do just want to post it in the chat for everyone before we go is our press kit that we have prepared for you all. That includes a variety of resources, media Q&As, our press releases, ground contacts for folks that will be in Kingston. So if you do have anything press related or needs, you know, everything should be in that kit there. And then one other final thing I did want to share is that we do have our public-facing campaign website, defendthedeep.org, which allows anyone to find their country and send either an email or a tweet at the relevant minister calling for them to support a moratorium. But with that, we will end, and thank you so much for joining. And of course, you know, please reach out if you have any questions. We will be circulating this recording to all participants afterwards as well. So thank you all, and have a great day.